Guy Ritchie's latest work, The Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare, tells the story of the first ever Special Forces unit formed during World War II. The film is based upon recently declassified documents from the British War Department and claims to tell a true story, but we'll get into that in a minute. The film itself was quite enjoyable, although not Guy Ritchie's greatest work, and it certainly suffered from pacing, particularly towards the middle of the film. The film also contained one of the worst portrayals of Winston Churchill I think I've ever seen on screen, which would have been okay if his character had only appeared a little bit towards the beginning, but he kept reappearing throughout, and it was always quite jarring. There was also far too much exposition. I think it's fair to assume that at least 90% of the people who went to watch this film already knew the basic outline of what went on during World War II. So, while it's not necessarily bad to include a quick recap of the summary of the events of the war to set the scene, this film included what felt like a 10-minute summary of the events of World War II. The dialogue was one of the weakest parts of this film. There was way too much repetition. As an audience member, you ended up hearing the same information about 3 or 4 times, as it was passed from character to character, and repeated almost verbatim over and over again. Now, it may be true that this is how information would have been passed along in real life, but it's not necessary to illustrate that every time in a film, and it just makes the plot drag. And it also felt like the writers didn't even try to hide it. For instance, I heard the following phrase, "This is an unsanctioned military operation," repeated at least 5 times by 5 different people. It is true that this kind of repetition could be used for dramatic effect, and that could work quite well if it was used once or maybe twice, but this was almost constant, and it didn't seem to serve any purpose. However, there were some elements of this film that were quite good. The cinematography, for instance, was well done, and there were some excellent shots, without the camera work unnecessarily distracting you from the film. The action sequences are a prime example of this, and the editing work was done on point throughout most of the film, particularly for the montage sequences at the end. I had a somewhat similar reaction to the soundtrack. It was good, and at times it was quite good, but sometimes it wasn't quite right. Going back to the problem of pacing, which I mentioned towards the beginning of this video, I think this was the main reason why I wasn't as impressed by this film as I thought I would be, particularly considering the other work which Guy Ritchie has done in the past. The pacing wasn't consistent throughout. Now, I don't mean by that for a film to be well-paced, it has to be completely fast-paced or completely slow-paced without any deviation throughout the entirety of a film. Of course, that would not be good pacing. But it is necessary to strike a good balance between fast-paced and slow-paced action. And this film didn't do that well. The first part of the film kind of followed this pace. Some action, a little bit of setup, things moving a little slower, and then some more action. But then it really slowed down in the middle, and it felt like this was just trying to set up the next piece of action, but it took a really long time, in fact the majority of the film, to get there. And then the final action piece did come, and then the film was over. Now, to be fair, that final action piece was the strongest point of the film, but it didn't need all the setup that came before it. The quality of the film overall was similar to the pacing. Parts of it were really well done, and then other parts really weren't that good. However, with that being said, let us now turn to look at the historical side of this story. I did some research into a book called Secret War Heroes by Marcus Binney. In this, he recounts Gus March Phillips' own version of the events, and from this, it seems that much of the film was heavily fictionized, although the general operation upon which it's based did in fact take place. For instance, when the British agents boarded the Duchess to capture her, they were met with little to no resistance. However, the film depicts 3 men fighting against 50 sailors, who are all heavily armed. Also, when the agents blow the anchor of the Duchess in order to sail her out of the port, this explosion created a very loud noise. According to the film, this resulted with every single soldier running to the water's edge and firing at the British agents in order to prevent them capturing the ship. However, in reality, when the explosion went off, everyone in the port thought an air raid had started, and they all went to seek the nearest shelter, and the ship just sailed out of the harbor with no resistance. However, despite these historical inaccuracies, it wasn't a terrible film overall, and I would rate it a 7 out of 10. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to comment your own thoughts down below, and be sure to subscribe for more movie reviews and commentary.